Yes, welcome to Hen House Studios Live. Today we feel very privileged and honored to have the world-renowned percussionist, composer, and educator, Adam Rudolph. Hey Adam.
Hey, how are you?
So glad that you can make it today.
Thanks.
I really want to thank you for coming, taking time out from your busy schedule. We all know how busy you are. Many of you probably don't know, but Adam has played music for what, 35 years now or longer? Or?
So, well, maybe like 30 years, yeah.
30 years.
Something like that, yeah.
30 years. And
Or
I'd like to
more,
get a little bit into the history. I know you're originally from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you still, though you live in Los Angeles, you have a lot of roots in Chicago. Why don't you talk a little bit about your upbringing in Chicago and your exposure to music there?
Yeah. I grew up in an area of the south side of Chicago called Hyde Park. And
the university town, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, the University of Chicago is there. It's on the south side. And at the time when I was getting to be a teenager in the late 60s, it was a really sort of fertile time and a very fertile area, too. Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Otis Spann, these were Buddy Guy, these were musicians we could hear a lot live, and I did hear a lot. And then I was exposed to a lot of the musicians from the AACM, the Art Ensemble of Chicago.
Oh, yes.
And Air. Steve McCall was a neighbor of mine, one of the great drummers from the AACM. And it was an inspiration to me to want to be involved in creativity. And at the same time, I was listening to a lot. My dad was taking me to hear Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and George Solti conducting the Chicago Symphony and all kinds of great live music. So it was a very fertile live music scene. Pretty soon after that, by the time I was 16, I was playing with a musician named Malawi Nuruddin, who was a great, great tenor player, and then soon after that, Fred Anderson, one of the co-founders of the AACM. And one of the things I learned from them very quickly was to really to devote oneself to pursuing your own sound in music and to really
Finding your own voice.
Yeah, exactly, to find your own voice. And I've always subsequently kind of pursued percussion in that way. I've never been so interested in being a percussionist per se, but I've just been interested in utilizing percussion instruments as an amplifier for my inner voice. The other thing I admired about a lot of the musicians, the Art Ensemble and so on, and Fred Anderson, was that they had the courage to really pursue their own artistic direction, regardless of whatever kinds of rewards or whether people who of their peers or whatever could appreciate it. But they went far into what their own direction was. And that's something that I really pursued subsequently with various artists.
So if I can interject, so the point is you were very interested in staying true to the inspiration that comes from within.
Yeah.
And then there's this concept that maybe woodshedding meaning practicing hours and hours in a room by yourself to get to a certain level, is not as important or as important. Maybe you could explain the relationship between playing what's from your inner soul and then
Right.
woodshedding and getting your skills. Because there's some players I know who can play anything, but they're not connected to what's in their inner soul. And
Right.
it seems like you maybe put your own personal voice ahead of working on that aspect of your musicianship rather than being in the room, but you have incredible chops. I mean, you can play as good as anyone anyway. So,
creativity in music to me has to do. I mean, first of all, I should just say the context of what I'm interested in is improvisational music, and we compose music for improvisational context. And I believe in the context of creativity in music, there's two dynamics, which is listening and imagination. And that means listening to what's going on around you when you perform, but also listening to your inner voice. And anything you can imagine, you can play. So what I've always done is that when I hear something that I want to do, I practice. I train my fingers or my hands to do that. But because I was developing a voice in music on hand drums, on hand percussion, there wasn't really a real precedent for doing that. So there's not like books to buy, and at that time, I mean, now there's musicians from all over the world around, but at that time in Chicago it wasn't. There were records. Right. So when I heard something that I wanted to do, I had to figure out the way to do it. So the idea being that your creativity leads your technique rather than the other way around, and that's how it's always worked for me. So when I hear something I want to do, I practice it. The same when I compose something, if I hear it in my mind's ear, then I find the way to communicate it to the other musicians.
Do you think it's safe to say in Western civilization that we've actually put technique in front of creativity when we're teaching children and adults music?
Well, virtuosity is something that's more readily appreciated than artistic vision, you know, and I think that is true. That is true, and I think it's a complex issue because it has to do with the functionality of music and how music functions in this culture and what it does. But of course, there's always been, you know, garage bands where people have always, you know, I mean, the tradition that I was around, which grew up around, which is an oral tradition, was always about musicians picking up an instrument and developing their own way of playing it. For example, soon after I spent years working with Don Cherry, the great trumpet player and composer. So Don, you know, the idea of having your own voice on the instrument, I mean, picking up a trumpet, now there's sort of the template of classical trumpet playing. And to get a gig in an orchestra, you know, you have to be able to bring the breath of your life into that very specific trumpet sound.
Right.
The music that I come out of is the opposite. It's like you hear one note and you know who that person is. That's what I mean. For example, the Dogon people, the cliff dwellers in Mali, West Africa, they have a concept they call mi, M-I. And that means the sound of the person's inner voice as it resonates through the instrument. So there's a deep, ancient philosophical basis for this idea. So we know when we hear John Coltrane, or we hear Don Cherry, or we hear Yusuf Lateef, or we hear Thelonious Monk on a piano, no less, within one or two notes, Miles Davis, you know exactly who it is. And that's what I've always been striving for in my music. And that's the part of the oral tradition has to do with what the elders pass on, is the most important, one of the most important qualities has to do with that.
So in essence then, if you apply that philosophy, then there really is no right or wrong when you're playing an instrument or expressing yourself musically, which if that's the case, I think is a beautiful concept.
Yeah. No, there isn't right or wrong. No, there's not right or wrong, and there's just it's
right if it's of you.
Yeah, but you have to know that. I mean, it doesn't mean, you know, also that anybody can just pick up anything at any time. I mean, it also it implies a certain kind of responsibility to tradition, in the sense that the tradition has to do with innovation and understanding music. So I knew at a very young age that if I was going to stay in music for a long period of time, I had to study as much about music as I possibly could. And I feel like being a student in music, being a student of music and what it implies in terms of creativity and vibration, sound, and existence was an ongoing, lifelong process in and of itself. Studiousness. So that implies a responsibility towards studiousness. But that's intuition too. That's the cultivation of the intuition, which is also something close to like what we talk about in yoga, you know, a body, mind, and spirit connection, and the cultivation of the intuitive, which is also something that's not well, how do you teach that? You know, you can't teach it didactically to say, okay, if you do this, this, this. Cultivation of the intuition has to do, once again, back with this idea of oral tradition and mentorship, and my mentors being, you know, Don or Yusuf Lateef, of passing on a thing about a creative attitude, a certain kind of open-mindedness, an intensity and seriousness in a very fun-loving way, but a seriousness about, a joyful way about what we do.
That's great. Recently, Adam came to Hen House Studios with a childhood friend of yours, the very well-known drummer Hamid Drake.
Yeah.
And you invented a music, bungi music. Maybe you could set up this clip for us and explain a little bit what went on and what this session and this music is all about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, without, I don't, you know, be redundant with what the clip itself says, but as you were saying about your bros, you know, Hamid and I grew up together. We met in a drum shop when we were 14, and right when we were first starting to play and started playing and hanging and talking about all these things and listening to the musicians, who some of which we were able later to perform with. And we just had this idea of, see, I don't see any difference between music that exists that people might consider to be abstract or heartbeat rhythm, you know. I mean, to me, it's just a continuum. But we wanted to move something that was a little more closer to earth, and to kind of do an acoustic version of like hip hop kinds of, because what I love, one of the many things I love in hip hop music is the sound palette, and the grooves are just amazing in the sound palette. So we wanted to create a sound palette out of the acoustic percussion instruments.
And without computers.
Yeah, right. Well, organic.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so you guys ready in there to roll a clip?
Yes.
Okay, let's roll it. Let's roll it. Adam Rudolph at the Hen House.
You can hear anything going against anything else. You know, it's just, it's form against form, form against form, form against form, form against form, form against form. It's sound against sound. Either it works or it doesn't work. But you have to have musicians who, number one, really, really know how to listen, deep listening. Okay, and number two, have a very evolved sense of imagination. And thirdly, have a really deep grasp of the craft and the elements of what they've studied themselves, you know, as an instrumentalist. Yeah, Hamid and I have been working together on and off since we were 14, which is a long time now, in various situations. And Hamid had this idea of of doing some dance tracks. And we decided to call Carlos Nino, because Carlos has been working with me with Meta Records and is a beautiful young DJ and promoter in town, and he's kind of tapped into this whole, you know, sort of 25 years old and younger audience, and people who seem to really enjoy and love music without categories. Carlos has been playing me some of this music, this sort of ambient, you know, groove dance music. A lot of it is very minimal, you know. But we wanted to do it really organically, without electronics. So we'll see how it, you know, how it unfolds.
And you hear the way that Uzi sounds countering that. Perfect.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Can you pump down for a minute, bro?
Okay.
So real quick.
So
You guys ready?
These drums are going to go up.
Let's do it.
One of the things I love about percussion is that, you know, the instruments you collect kind of becomes your palette of your orchestration. You know, it sort of reflects something about the sounds that call to you. Sort of, it is you. They're all your instruments. Have to get everybody Nobody can leave.
12, 13, Are we ready?
John Coltrane once said, "Knowledge will set you free," and that's a profound statement worth that I've reflected upon a lot.
Yes, that was Adam Rudolph at Hen House Studios with Hamid Drake. Adam, I know you have your own orchestra, the Organic Orchestra, and I know there's a deep rhythmic concept that you've actually invented yourself, the concept of maybe playing in one rather than getting caught up in larger time signatures.
Right.
If I'm getting it correct, maybe you could explain a little bit about your orchestra and the approach, the Organic Orchestra, and your approach to rhythm.
Yeah, well, Organic Orchestra was, I felt it was the time in my life to start to pass on some of the knowledge that I've gleaned from my mentors, who I'd mentioned, Don Cherry, Yusuf Lateef, who I've worked with since 1988, and Fred Anderson, Charles Moore, Ken Cox from Detroit. And these are people who really who opened things up for me, So it just felt like it was time to sort of open up the doors. So for that, I've the last few years been doing this Organic Orchestra, which involves a lot of musicians, all from the Los Angeles area.
It's a big band. I've seen it can be as many as 30 people.
Yeah,
right?
and it's percussionists and woodwind players. Some of them are from classical music backgrounds, all kinds of different backgrounds.
International
Yeah,
players.
yeah. So, and I've been developing a notation system for that to try and make it as open, as free as possible, but still keep some kind of focus on where the orchestration moves. And I conduct it in a way where it's actually spontaneously orchestrated based upon the moment. I mean, it's philosophically so much about what we do in improvisation is about the moment and being in the here and now, which I think is one of the beautiful dynamics of what improvisation of music does, is in terms of how it applies to our everyday life. I mean, it's really, we live in the illusion that, the sun comes up every day and we go to work at this time and so on, we eat at this time, but in reality, of course, only the moment exists. We don't know what tomorrow will bring or the next second. You don't know what I'm going to say next, and I don't know what you, but when you play improvisation of music that's really free and you have the discipline to be free like that, it's an exciting potential, and it really, so the Organic Orchestra is sort of a move into doing this in a large ensemble context.
I want the viewers to understand that this is improvised music, but within a specific framework.
Yeah.
So maybe a good analogy or not would be like a book with the chapters, but you guys fill in the words during the performance. Would that be proper?
No, I like that. That's
works?
perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, the topic is there. It's like a conversation or a topic. We know what we're going to talk about in general. I'm not going to suddenly start talking about the Lakers or something out of the blue, but within that, and also I think of it a chapter in a book even where there's characters, where when we talk to each other, you maintain your character of who you are, and you don't suddenly become me. So people have, in terms of the context of the improvisation, people have their stance and function of who they are expressively. They don't have to abandon that in order to dialogue with somebody else. But it gets back once again to what I think is the key elements is listening and imagination, or listening and creativity. In terms of what you mentioned before about rhythm, I can't really say I invented it in the sense that, invention is, but it's my slant, the way I've sort of come to look at things. Once again, through a lot of working with my peers and my elders, Charles Moore and Big Black, great hand drummer, the master hand drummer, but sort of gleaned and simplified and thought about it more and more. In physics, they postulate the 11 dimensions. And as you get into the higher and higher dimensions, the laws of physics become simpler and simpler.
Mm.
I found this is true really in music or vibration. But just looking at the dynamic of rhythm for a second, I found over time that everything in rhythm breaks down to something that's odd and even.
Right.
3 and 2. And in fact, there is philosophical basis for this. 3, once again, in the Dogon, one of the most ancient cultures in West Africa, the cliff dwellers of Mali, they say the 3 is the male energy. It's called Nya, which would be the yang energy.
Wow.
And female, the 2 or 4, the female energy is called Tolo, which is the yin energy. And every rhythm is a tension and a marriage and interplay between the male and female energy.
So does that make 5, 3, and 2
Well,
like a marriage?
Well, I look at it, you can look at it, that's why I call my rhythm, my way of looking at it, cyclic verticalism. And the cycles have to do with the horizontal way of thinking about rhythm, which is 2 plus 3 is 5. So you play 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1. And you can go from there and make huge cycles, as we do in Indian music, for example. The verticalism is the fundamental polyrhythm, which is 2 against 3. Something 2 happening, so for example, if you just say like this, right? My left hand is playing 3 and my right hand is playing 2. Now I switch. And from there you can build, you can. And there's a different illusion when you go. When the 3 is in the low. Because the low is always dominant over the high. Low to high is tension, and high to low is release. So I like to play, here's a 21 beat cycle. So you can, you can make, so when you have the bigger it becomes this ever expanding grid, so basically you can be as free as you want to in it, but you have some kind of form and shape to work in. You can generate form in music from nothingness, but form is one of the most difficult things to master in music, I think, to really understand form. And also to play inside of a form, like a pop tune or a 32 bar, or you can generate form. And I apply these to my own compositions for the organic orchestra or moving pictures, where I use these concepts to actually create some sense of form that's like it's like the chapters, the thing that the vehicle which people can move through as they play.
It's great. I mean, I watch too, and I admire how many young musicians who I know are stuck in this 4/4 concept, are gravitating toward you, and you're opening up their minds, and they're playing, explaining this system, teaching this system to them. I think it's a great thing. We only have a couple minutes left, so I sort of wanted to leave it up to you. You want to play some thumb piano for us, or?
Yeah, sure. I brought this. This is a gift from James Makubia, a wonderful musician I've worked with from Uganda. And if you want to, maybe you want to help me out on the djembe.
About playing in 21, we'll see.
No, we're gonna stay right in the land of round, a nice little round. In fact, I'll let you lay down the groove, whatever groove you feel, and I'll find you.
was great. How are we doing for time? Doing okay? Okay, cool, great. Wow, that was, for me, that was very special. I hope that was special for you as it was for me. That
beautiful.
felt
Yeah, right
really
on,
nice
man.
and relaxed.
Yeah.
It's really
Beautiful,
great.
wonderful.
So in closing, maybe you could talk a little bit about how one of your last concerts you were performing with, was it with Yusef? Is that was your last show?
Yeah, well, my affiliation, Yusuf is my dear friend and my mentor. Yusuf is in his 80s now, one of the greatest living masters in improvised music. And for people who don't know about his music, I hope you get a chance to check it out. We've done a lot of collaborative projects together. I mean, I look at him as my teacher, but he looks at me as a peer. And we have a new, anyway, he came and performed with the Organic Orchestra, and we recorded it, and that CD is coming out on Meta Records in the summer.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
That's
so
fantastic.
we're trying to stay productive.
Where does Yusef live?
Yusuf lives in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
And he's retired from teaching at UMass. So it was really a special thing that he came out here to perform with the orchestra. We performed primarily as a duet. We were at the San Francisco Jazz Festival not too long ago in South Africa, but he really wanted to be